Yo, what's up? My name is James McCool. I am the owner of PaydiRtDFS.com. I nailed it this time. I did not forget the name of my site. Today, we are going to be talking through the Portfolio Manager. I did a nice, long, chunky stream yesterday going over all the NFL tools. If you'd like to go watch that, I will grab a link to that right now. If you obviously weren't able to make it. If you were able to make it, then it's great. Glad that you guys made it through. But if you weren't, you should go watch it. I did a walkthrough of all the different NFL tools that we're going to be using this year over at Paydirt and how they work and what they do and why they're important and all that kind of stuff, right? Today, we're going to be doing a more comprehensive walkthrough of the Portfolio Manager. So I have been doing kind of on and off videos of the Portfolio Manager over the last couple of weeks, but nothing like that was a larger deep dive. And that was mostly because I have been working on continuing to update and change it, and I've just been doing smaller videos on each of the little things that I have done over the last couple of weeks as I've been continuing to optimize it and make it do cool things and add functions and all that kind of stuff. Now, to be fair, I also will continue to do that, right? It's a tool that I think is going to continue to get updates and upgrades and small functionality things and all that kind of stuff just over time. But I think that it's important to go over it a bit here and talk a little bit about it so that people can get their footing moving into NFL season. Is it in its final form? Absolutely not. There will be things that are added to it. There will be functions that are added to it. There's going to be different things that I do and fix and all that kind of shit. And I mean, there's still things that are like kind of broken, right? There's a reason why this tool has lived in the experimental section. And that's because every once in a while, something will break, or like an ID set will not be active, or, something weird will happen, right? But I think that the tool at this point is in a good enough spot, and I'm pretty proud of where it is at in terms of functionality, uptime, accessibility, all that kind of stuff. So all of that said, there's going to continue to be function improvements and all that kind of stuff moving forward, but this will serve as, for now, going into the NFL season, kind of the baseline tutorial set of how we're going to use Portfolio Manager. So what we're going to cover today, I'm going to kind of lightly cover the way that you load all of the files into it. I'm going to go function by function, or function set by function set, and talk through what the functions do. I'm going to talk a little bit about why the functions that I chose to create are useful and what they do. And then we're going to kind of go through a process of like talking through if you wanted to build a portfolio for this kind of set of lineups, and you would do things like this, or if you are aiming to do X, Y, or Z with your portfolio, then this is how you do that. Obviously, I cannot speak to every single version of how people are going to use this tool. I myself am still kind of figuring out and tinkering and looking through all the different ways that I can use this tool. But I'm going to go through kind of a top-down look at how to use each one of the functions. So and explain it out a bit. So let's go ahead and do that. So I have not done anything in regards to getting ready for this MLB slate yet. Wait, we had an MLB slate, right? Okay, so let's just go through the process of loading NFL, right? Because I think that's what most people care about. So for now, the Portfolio Manager is found in experimental. I think that it will continue to be in experimental for now, and experimental will eventually turn into third party or something like that. Currently, it is free to use, right? We have no paywall here. So currently, you can just use it and go play around with it. But after today, moving into the NFL season, it is going to be behind paywall. So for those that have been using it for free, go grab a subscription. You can find a subscription right here, this little button right here. You can go grab a subscription. So this is what you are met with at first. You're going to always start with, what site are you playing on? You're going to select a sport. You're going to select a game type. This top bar, this top little nav bar, this is always kind of the same thing, right? We're going to be playing NFL, or loading NFL today. We're not going to be playing it, but we're going to be loading NFL, so we're going to leave it here. We're going to be doing classic. I'll probably also show some showdown stuff just for austerity. You have two different tabs here. So you have the data load, and then you have the manage portfolio. Note that you can technically be on no tabs. This is a fun thing I found out today. I didn't actually know you could do that. But so if you are on data load, this is where you're going to load all of your files. When you go to manage portfolio, this will be where you go after all the files are loaded. Now, I'm going to show a caveat about that as soon as we get things loaded, but just know that that's the basic function or the basic form of how this app works. Okay. You can load three different kinds of files. You can load either a SaberSim-esque file, which is just IDs for the players. You can load a DraftKings or FanDuel-oriented file, which is names and IDs. Or you can do just names, which is what I prefer to export from the Paydirt optimals. So with that being said, I'm going to do just names for this. So now the basic structure here is set up. We're going to be loading for NFL, for Classic Slate, on DraftKings, with just names. So let's go ahead and do that, right? Let's go over to DraftKings, and let's go get a site CSV. So we're going to go Classic. We're going to go to the main slate. We're going to do $100 Millie Maker, and then we're going to export to CSV. This is the file that you need, okay? So that's going to come up with this guy, and this is 983. And then what we need to do is we can go load this first, right? So this is downloads this guy. Okay, cool. We have our site CSV loaded. What do we need next? Portfolio file. So this is going to be your lineups. I am going to go get my lineups from the optimals here at Paydirt. And if you did not watch the video yesterday on the models for Paydirt, then this is the range of outcomes, and you'll be able to grab all of your optimals here. This functions the same way as an optimizer. I'm going to go do a mix. I want a 75-25 split of projections and ownership, and I'm going to export the data for names. So this is the basic way to do things. You set up your filters here, and then you export it for the portfolio manager export. If you use the filtered one, this is going to apply these filters. If you use the full data export, it'll give you 10,000 lineups. But I would like the filters, so I'm going to grab just names. What that's going to do is it's going to give me this file. And this file is for, this is all of my lineups that just got pulled from the optimals. There's 5,764 of them. So sounds good. NFL optimals export. I don't need to save that. I'm going to go back in here, and we're going to go grab it. Cool. Loaded. Great. Good, grand. Awesome. So now I need a projections file. So I can just go back over to here to the range of the outcomes. I can say play range of outcomes. I'm going to go advanced. And then I'm going to export ROO for the portfolio manager. You don't need to do anything to this file. We know this is NFL ROO export number 5. Go back here and load it up. Okay. So important caveat. Wait until this little guy stops doing his thing. You have to wait for that to finish before you go over to manage portfolio. If you do not go over, or if you do not wait for him to be finished, then what will happen is the portfolio will not be created. So, okay, that's how you load it. Now, really quick thing. I recognize that loading files into a tool is a little bit cumbersome. There are many sites that just have these things, just go off of the things that they have that are loaded off of their site. I wanted to make this tool to be usable by anyone. If you do not like what Paydirt produces in terms of projections or optimals, go use SaberSim, use ETR, use Skotastic, use whoever you would like. You feel free. You can load any of those things into this tool. This tool will make the optimals that you get from other sources into a better portfolio. And I truly believe that. And that's mostly because the way that this tool was produced was to be built so that people could load as a third-party tool in, so they could then find the lineups that are the best out of the lineups that they load into. So could I have set this up to be reading from the Paydirt database? Absolutely. Might I still do that? Absolutely. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if people yell at me enough about the file loading stuff. But it was my belief that I wanted to build a tool, or it was my prerogative that I wanted to build a tool that anyone could use from any site, so that they could make better lineups and a better portfolio. So that is the reason why I have these file loads. It's kind of similar with the contest analyzer, which I think I'll probably talk about this week as well, because I'm adding in some cool payout info and ROI info. But I just think that to a certain extent, loading things in yourself and doing user uploads is very powerful. And there are a lot of people that prefer to have their own sources, not Paydirt stuff. And I recognize that. I'm fine with that. I don't take any offense to that. So that's the reason why. I understand it's cumbersome, but there's reasons for it. So this is what you will end up with when you are then all loaded up. So as you can see, we still have these things up here, but now we have a sidebar here, which, by the way, you can go back and forth a little bit if you want a wider screen. We have now a reset portfolio. We have a contest size, field strength, little form here. So anytime that you see one of these little boxes with a submit button, this is a form. And nothing that you change in here is going to affect anything until you hit that button. So just recognize that. We have a display drop down here, which is portfolio and export base. I'll talk about the export base here in a couple minutes. And then we have a download portfolio button, an add all to custom export, and a clear custom export. Now, after you run some functions, you will also see another button here that says add X lineups to your custom export. So this is kind of the basic look of what you get with the Portfolio Manager. You can also, if you just want to see all of your lineups, remove that sidebar entirely. And then if you want to bring it back out, you can do that, right? On mobile, because this does technically work on mobile, you're going to get pretty scrunched, right? I mean, technically this works, but like this is mostly a desktop tool, right? It's going to be really hard to work on mobile. I have used it on mobile just because I was in a crunch. When I was visiting my mom in the hospital like 2 weeks ago or something, I had to upload lineups from my phone for baseball, and I had to use the Portfolio Manager to do it. And I got it done, but let me tell you, it fucking sucked, man. It was hard to do. So this is a laptop and desktop oriented tool. Again, with the file upload stuff, this is more geared towards MME. There are a lot of different tools that you can use at Paydirt. For NFL, you can use the range of outcomes, you can use betting models, pivot finder, stack finder. You can even use the contest simulations if you'd like to on your phone. But this tool specifically, this is harder to run on your phone, just as an FYI. It might work okay on a tablet. But again, on that one, I guess I'm not entirely sure. So when you're looking at this, one of the things that you can do on this, just right off, is get a sense of what lineups look good or bad. So if I look at all of these lineups here, right, and I extend this out, we're going to see some info. We're going to see what the stack determination was for the lineup. And this is oriented around what I consider stack sports, or what the Portfolio Manager considers stack sports. You'll see the size of the main stack. And then you'll also see the salary of the stack, the median projection for the stack, the ownership for the stack. And then we get into the proprietary stuff. So this stuff is all kind of boilerplate, right? Like this is all, we know these. We have seen these stats forever. But then we also have projected dupes for the lineups. And this tool has the best dupe prediction tech in the industry. I am very confident saying that. It beats the shit out of SaberSim, that's for sure. So there are a lot of SaberSim users and SaberSim MME users who actually do come into this tool specifically to use the dupes function. Just because it's better. Then we also have finish rate percentiles. And this is telling you what the expected finishing percentile of a lineup is if things go well, right? You could think of this as like a 1 standard deviation above what the expected finishing rate would be if you want to get mathematically technical about it. So, this is telling you for this lineup, if things go well, you would expect this lineup to finish somewhere between 1 and 2 percentile. We have some other lineups here like this one. This one, if all things go well, this lineup is expected to finish in around the 3rd percentile or so. Remember, when we're talking about MME and when we're talking about GPPs, we want to finish in the top 1%. So, this is a useful thing in terms of just a rule of thumb. Win percentage, how often a lineup wins, just based off of its projection and based off the lineups around it. And edge percentile, or lineup edge. So lineup edge is a combination of a couple different things. It takes into account the projected dupes, it takes into account the projected score, it takes into account the finishing rate, and it takes into account the ownership. So this is a pretty good, all kind of like kitchen sink formula that takes into account what the edge of a lineup is based on all the things that matter when you're entering something into GPPs. Edge is especially valuable, and edge and dupes are especially valuable in Showdown, which we'll talk about in a bit. Then we have weighted ownership and geomean. So these two kind of accomplish the same thing in a lot of ways. A lot of people use geomean, which is the product ownership of a lineup, to determine the ownership rather than the projected ownership. And I think that's fine. But I created weighted ownership to take that a little bit of a step further. And what weighted ownership can do is going to be ownership with regards to whether a lineup has relative value in it or not. So really quick, if we just sort by ownership here, we're going to find a couple lineups that, even though the ownership is going down, we do see that, say, with this lineup, right? This lineup actually has a higher weighted ownership, even though the ownership has gone down. As we go down, we'll see a couple more instances of that, right? Like this one goes from 54 to 57. And as we get farther and farther down, we actually see that we do have some that jump even farther up above as well. So this one, 47 to 50, right? So we can see that there are some lineups. This one goes from 40.18 to 44.9. So this lineup technically has a higher weighted ownership than this one, meaning that this one has more relative value going for it. I usually, when I am using this tool, I do not use ownership whatsoever. I use weighted ownership. Reason being that I think that having an understanding of where the relative value is coming from in your lineup is important, and that takes it into account. Geomean does a lot of the same work. Like if we do that same exercise here, we can see that with, like, say this one goes down and then it goes up, and then, you know, geomean goes back up here, right? We see kind of the same thing here. Geomean does kind of the same thing, but I think that weighted ownership does it a little bit better. That being said, if you have been using geomeans for this purpose, then, you know, continue using geomean. I have the geomean there for users like you. And then finally, we have diversity. So the diversity score here is really important. The diversity score tells you, based on all of the lineups that are in the portfolio manager, what lineups are similar to the other lineups that were used. And this brings up a really important point. And I'm going to zoom in on my face here for a second. When you load things into the portfolio manager has very little understanding of anything outside of the lineups that you load into it. So if you load 10 lineups that are all basically exactly the same lineup, right? It will think that those lineups represent more than they likely do. Does that make sense? So like I have in this one, in this set, like almost 6,000 lineups. So there's a nice wide spread of lineups for it to think through here. Like there's a nice sample that it can use to determine, okay, based on a large sample of lineups, feel pretty confident that the finishing percentiles here make sense, and the win rates make sense, and the dupe prediction makes sense. You know, all these things that based on a larger sample of lineups inspire a bit more confidence, right? The less lineups that you enter into this, the less powerful that it is. That is not to say that you cannot only enter a handful of lineups into it, because it will still then say, of those 10 lineups, if they're similar, it's still going to find the edges in those lineups and tell you what lineups are better than the other ones. This tool is meant to tell you what lineups out of all the ones that you entered into it are the best to play. So I think that that's a very important point to make on this, because there will be times where if you enter in a whole bunch of bad lineups, it will tell you what the best of the lineups are that are bad. But like, they're still probably not great lineups. So it's good. But one of the reasons why I think that using the optimal set is good and valuable in this is that you can get a lot of lineups out of this thing. Like there's going to be 10,000 lineups that you can use. And look, like you can even do, if you wanted 20,000 lineups out of this, you could grab 20,000 lineups out of this and load them into the portfolio manager. And that's a shit ton of lineups for it to think through. Now, granted, the more lineups that you load into it, the longer it's going to take to load, all that kind of stuff. But more lineups, the better. Just because it gives more context for what the slate actually looks like for a tool that is not hooked up to a database anymore, right? So that was an important caveat to make. That being said, diversity score is a very cool thing. So it is going to tell you the lineups that are very similar to other lineups in your portfolio versus lineups that are very different. If I sort this by lowest to highest, and you look at these lineups look, for the most part, very similar. We got a lot of Jaden Daniels. We got a lot of Christian McCaffrey and James Conner. I see a lot of Igbuka. I see a lot of Deebo Samuel. I see a lot of, Tucker Kraft, David Njoku, right? Like these lineups are all very similar. If I sort this highest to lowest, we see that these lineups are very different. Here's some Drake May, some Brock Purdy, some Devon Kane, Chase Brown, McMillan, Nico Collins. We have Kenneth Walker, Brendan Strange, right? Like these lineups are much different than the ones that we were just looking at. So the diversity score here is good because it is based on math, right? Like this is based on Jacquard distancing and is really strong in terms of letting you know differences within the portfolio that you have built. So later on in this video, when I show the stratification function that I use for diversity, this diversity score becomes very valuable to us because what it allows us to do is say, okay, here's a subset of lineups that I like. I have stratified, or I have parsed it down based on what I want to be looking for dupes, what I want to be looking for in terms of teams stacked, in terms of players allowed, things like that, right? Like I have parsed all of that stuff down. I now have a chunk of lineups that I like. I just want the 10 lineups out of this, right? And using the diversity function is a good way of getting those 10 lineups out of, say, 100. Because what it does is it, in essence, says, okay, here are 100 lineups. And then here is a stratification, a linear stratification of them based on which ones are similar and which ones are different. So you get a nice diversified portfolio out of a chunk. So yeah, that's kind of, leeway into the functions here. So as we look at functions, let's go ahead and think through those. And also, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. I don't have those showing, but oh no, now I can't show them on chat. That's a bummer. Yes, I can. Okay, yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. But I'm going to run through each one of the functions over here, each one of the function sets, and talk about what each one does. And then I'll show some examples of what they do as well. So with the macro filter, let's just talk through each one of these. So we have the macro filter options and the micro filter options. We have trimming options, presets, stratify, conditionals manager for players, and exposure management. So each one of these functions has a very specific purpose that I have built out. I will say right now, I'm likely removing the presets here pretty soon unless somebody yells at me not to. Because I have not touched them in weeks. And even through all of my back testing, I have not been playing around with them much. Now, granted, I should, before I remove them, do back testing against all of the portfolios that I've built and all of the MME stuff that I have done this month. But I am considering removing the presets. If anybody would like me to keep them, then speak your piece, because I think they're just taking up room right now. The macro filters are going to be filters that affect large portions of lineups, right? This is kind of like an overarching, I have my portfolio and I want to affect things on a large scale. So these options are things like max acceptable dupes, minimum acceptable salary, max acceptable salary, max acceptable finish percentile, and min acceptable finish percentile, as well as including specific stacks, and removing specific stacks, right? So for these, the dupe stuff is mostly oriented towards Showdown, but is also valuable for things like Golf or League of Legends or Counter-Strike. Min acceptable salary is going to tell you, like, if you only want, lineups that are 49.5 or higher, this would be how you do it. Max acceptable salary is if you don't want any lineups above 49,500, right? Max acceptable finish percentile affects, obviously, the finish percentile column. And this is based off of, this would be like 50th percent, right? If you were to change this to 10, this would be 10th percentile. And then min acceptable lineup edge is saying what is the lowest lineup edge that is acceptable to you in your lineups. So for here, obviously, if I sort this by edge, I have one lineup that is negative 3.88% in the top 100 lineups, right? But if I didn't want any lineups that were negative edge, then I could adjust that here. So for instance, just to, well, actually, let's talk through the rest of these really quick. Include specific stacks. Its default is all stacks. If you want to include specific stacks, you choose all stacks. Remove specific stacks. You can say no or yes. And if you choose yes, then you can be prompted to choose to remove whatever stacks. If you choose specific stacks here, then you can choose to include only specific stacks, right? So let's show what a couple of these things do. So in terms of minimum acceptable salary and maximum acceptable salary, I think everybody kind of knows what those are. So I'm not going to show off these too much. But in terms of the lineup edge, let's show how drastic a change this can be, right? So granted, I built these all off of Paydirt, right? So I don't know how much of this is going to be negative, right? Because over at Paydirt, I kind of have things tuned towards building good lineups already. But if we were to change this to 0, and then we were to hit portfolio here, and I'll talk about export here in a sec. But if I hit portfolio, then we right now have 5,700 lineups. Oops, that's not good. It looks like a reset. I think I was sitting on it too long. So we can just reload it really quick because we didn't do anything yet. Go there. We'll go optimals. And we'll go projections. Wait for the little guy to stop running. Okay. So then this will load back up. Takes a second because there's like 6,000 lineups. Okay, so if I were to say, right now I have 5,700 lineups. Let's go ahead and change this to 0 and then hit the portfolio button. Now we have 3,397 lineups. So it took away 2,500 lineups, right? That's pretty considerable. So now every lineup that I have in here is going to be positive edge, meaning that every single lineup in here could be played in whatever contest, right? Specifically large field, though. I think that positive lineup edge is more important for large field. And to be clear, I don't usually use removing negative edge lineups. Typically, the way that I build things out, I am fine with having negative edge lineups simply because I like to hedge a portion of my portfolio. Usually, I only have around 15 to 20% of my portfolio be negative edge lineups, and purely as a hedge. But if you wanted to remove all of the negative edge, then you absolutely can. Quick question here. Is stack function based on the amount of players are being relied on, or is it based on traditional definition? It is based on the team being relied on. So I talked about this in my NFL video yesterday, but for this year, my designation for a stack is no longer going to be based on what the quarterback is. It's now going to be based on what the most players in a lineup is. So for instance, when we're looking here, right, this is more reliant on San Francisco because we have Christian McCaffrey and George Kittle here. Daniel Jones is by himself. He does not have a wide receiver attached to him. So this lineup is more dependent on San Francisco doing well than it is the New York Giants doing well. Down here, we still see that if we have Bryce Young or a quarterback plus their wide receiver, then we're still going to see that that is the stack that is called out. You know, we have this one, Jaden Daniels plus Deebo Samuel. This is the Washington stack. But when it comes to the designation in the portfolio manager, I think this year that it is more important to look at what team is most relied on rather than just the quarterback. If you'd like to know why I feel that way, then you can check out the Discord, or you can go watch the video that I put up yesterday around the NFL tools. But I've talked pretty at length about it over the last couple of days, and I think that it's a fair decision to make. Okay, so let's go ahead and reset the portfolio now. So, also something weird happened there with salary. I'm not sure what that was. But if we wanted to then say, okay, I only want to see Washington stacks, right? We can do this. We can say instead of all stacks, go specific stacks, and then hit the portfolio, right? So now this is all Washington stacks, right? And we have 1,087 of them. And these are also all Washington stacks that are positive edge, right? So if I wanted to say, I don't really care about the edge, I can go back to, negative 50% here and only do Washington stacks. I can do that as well. I have 2,109 lineups that are Washington stacks that are both positive and negative edge, right? So I'm fine with doing that. If I wanted to say, then we can go back up and reset our portfolio. Let's find all of the Washington actually, let's just find all the Cincinnati stacks that are positive edge. I think that Cincinnati stacks are likely going to be popular, so let's just do that. For Cincinnati, I only have 194 Cincinnati stacks. I don't know what's going on with that. I think that that's actually something that's happening in the optimals right now. But this would show you all of the specific stacks that are Cincinnati that are a positive lineup edge, right? So then you would be able to just parse through all of these. Interestingly, right, here's a Joe Burrow without anybody stacked them. Here's Joe Burrow with Mike Gesicki and Jamar Chase, right? So we see all of these different Cincinnati stacks, right? And you can always just go up and reset the portfolio as soon as you want to get back down to normal. So we can say all stacks, move here. What if we wanted to remove specific stacks, right? We could say, okay, I don't want to see any of the Cincinnati stacks. I don't care about those. But I'm fine with having negative edge lineups. Okay, so we have 5,439 lineups here that are totally fine. I actually think I know why this is happening and I know how to fix it. So that is all of those things, right? The macro filter options are going to be what you are looking at for large changes to the portfolio, adding or removing stacks, looking for certain edge percentages, looking for certain salary thresholds. Now, I did have a question also the other day about adding in more of those macro filters, saying that you only want lineups within a certain ownership range. You only want lineups within a certain projection range, right? I'm going to add those before the season starts, probably when I go in and figure out what the fuck's going on with the salary thing that I just saw. So that is micro or macro filter. Micro filter is more on the player level, right? So what players do you want to see in all of the lineups? Like lineups that only contain X player, lineups that contain none of X players, lineups that include players from X team, lineups that do not include any players from X team, and then also what stack sizes you would like to have, right? So this is more of, okay, I have already gone through and I'm happy with what the macro looks like, right? Now I would like to see what does the micro look like. So in this instance, what we can do is say, okay, specific stacks. I want to see Cincinnati stacks, right? So here's the macro. And then I want to see, all right, I only want to see Cincinnati stacks that have Jamar Chase. Oops, that's Chase Brown. That have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. So now I can hit the portfolio with that. So there are 8 lineups that are Cincinnati stacks that have both Jamar Chase and T. Higgins in them. And not all of them have Joe Burrow. Again, important distinction that I'm making this year in the portfolio manager is that with this one, this has Chase Brown, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase, but no Joe Burrow. This lineup is still heavily reliant on Cincinnati doing well, but it does not have Joe Burrow. This one, Jordan Love, Chase Brown, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. this one, Drake May with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, right? So this one is more reliant on T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and then hoping that Drake May can outscore Joe Burrow, right? So these micro filters are applied after you are happy with the macro filters that you have put in. We could also do things like, all right, let's go up and reset this portfolio again. Let's say, okay, let's go with San Francisco stacks, right? I only want San Francisco stacks. Okay, sounds good. But I then also want to remove Christian McCaffrey. All right, we have 152 that remove Christian McCaffrey, right? So here's Brock Purdy plus George Kittle. Here's just Brock Purdy. Here's Brock Purdy, Ricky Pearsall, and George Kittle, right? We're going to probably have Brock Purdy and Ricky Pearsall. We're going to have a lot of Kittle, right? So these micro filters are what you do after you have done your macro. We can also do another one here, right? So say that we want, let's go back up and reset. Say that we wanted to do, let's see. Say that we want to do Washington stacks, right? Let's do that. And then I think that Carolina is just going to get shit stomped this week. I want to remove Carolina, all Carolina players, not just stacks, all Carolina players from these lineups. So at that point, I don't have any of those that I can do right now. So let's go ahead and restart the portfolio there. So that would have moved the Carolina stacks, and that might have thrown an error, actually. Let's see if we can do that with anything else. Let's see if I can just do that on the portfolio. Okay, so that's throwing an error. Like I said, experimental thing. Can we do this with... Actually, what is that error? Filter player columns. Well, yeah, of course, name columns not defined. Okay, that's probably something easy to fix. Anyway, if you wanted to remove Carolina in the next 2 hours, then you would be able to do that through here. This apparently is only set up for MLB right now. So I should probably go fix that shortly. But yeah, that's what you would do. Say that you wanted Washington stacks, but you didn't want to include Carolina because you think Carolina is just going to get beat into the ground. That's how you would do it. And then finally, the last filter here, and this is all reset. So say that we were looking at, let's go back to Cincinnati stacks, right? Let's go portfolio. And then let's say that we only want 3-man stacks. We can do that. And now we have 24 Cincinnati 3-man stacks. So there you go. That is the micro filters. Reset. Okay, so these two kind of go hand in hand. The trimming functions do not go hand in hand. Trimming function and the rest of these kind of like trimming functions, presets, and Stratify all are kind of within their own, right? So the macro filters are going to obviously apply at all times. It's always a good idea to do macro filters. If you don't want to do any micro filters, though, totally understandable. I don't do micro filters. Well, actually, for baseball, I do micro filters because I will include sizes, and I'll make sure that I have an appropriate amount of 5-man stacks versus 4-man stacks for my portfolio. I likely will also include sizes of 2 or more for NFL. Maybe I'll do 3 or more. I don't know. I haven't figured out what I'm going to do for NFL yet. But I typically don't find it necessary to lock or remove players or include or remove teams. I will remove teams if I think there's bad weather in baseball. But for NFL, I don't know how often I'm going to be saying, yeah, I don't want any of this team in my stacks, right? Like I think there's going to be likely plenty of opportunities to use one-offs from basically any team in the league, except for, I don't know, maybe the New York Giants or something like that, if they're just giga trash. Or who's going to be the worst team? Probably Indianapolis this year. They're starting fucking Daniel Jones. Maybe the Browns. I don't know. Anyway, micro filters also apply well, but the trimming function is kind of the first of the functions below it that is more of like this is affecting the way that your lineups look in terms of the lineup build. So macro filters is your entire portfolio. Micro filters is kind of the players within the portfolio, and trimming options is based on the lineups that you are seeing. So you can look at all three of these as based around the lineups and how the lineups look and how they're built. So the trimming options, I talked a bit about the trimming stuff yesterday in the NFL video. But what trimming does is it is taking the projection of something and then comparing it against the ownership of that thing. And if the projection goes down, the ownership also has to go down. That's like the base idea behind trimming something in regards to DFS. So as we are looking at these lineups, right? Actually, let's get a smaller set here. Let's just go with. Okay, let's get our Cincinnati stacks, and then let's also do a micro filter for just 3-man Cincinnati stacks, right? Okay, so as we are looking at these, we can see this is default sorted by median, right? So as we are looking at that, we see that the ownership is kind of all over the place. But for this top lineup, the one that projects the best, if we use ownership, or if we use weighted ownership, or if we use geomean, because those are three options in the trimming, this one has an ownership of 68.09, a weighted ownership of 55.24, and a geomean of 4.77. As we go down in median, the next acceptable lineup has to be either below this ownership, below this weighted ownership, or below the geomean, right? So when we go to this next one, this next lineup is acceptable because in all three of those instances, no matter what trimming function we use, it is going to be below the ownership variable that we have above it. But then when we get to this next lineup, it is now above this one, right? So in terms of the linear degradation of ownership in relation to median, this lineup would not make the cut because it has higher ownership than this one at a lower median outcome. If that, hopefully all that makes sense. So when we trim this, what we should expect is to see that as the median goes down, so does either the ownership or the weighted ownership or the geomean. And what that's going to leave us with is lineups that have their ownership justified by their projection. So I am going to use, let's just use ownership here on this first one, right? And we're going to apply it to the portfolio. And then what we see is we have now three lineups that have their ownership justified by their median. We see that the median linearly goes down, as does the ownership. And as we see, the weighted ownership actually does not. So if we were to use weighted ownership, we likely would get different results here. So we can go do that now, right? Let's go ahead and reset the portfolio. Go back up here. We already have this set up. We're happy. Do our Cincinnati. We go here. We only want 3-man stacks. Go here. So now let's go ahead and change the trimming variable to weighted ownership. Now we only have two lineups that are applicable. We have this 126.58 and the 126.06. Nothing else is applicable based on median and ownership. Everything else has too high of ownership or too low of projection. We can reset it one more time and look at geomean, right? So let's go ahead and do our Cincinnati stacks. Let's cut down here for only 3-mans. And then let's trim this based on geomean this time. I expect to see something similar. Yep, so there's 3 lineups, right? And this one is 126.58, 126.06, and 123.21. But as the projection goes down, the geomean also goes down. So what this is doing for you, if you were going to play a 3-max or a 5-max, this is the function that I think is most valuable. The reason for that is that you want to be playing in your 3-max and your 5-max, and even in your 10-max. If you have a subset of a larger set, the thing that you're focusing on the most is whether the projection makes sense for the ownership. you don't want to have a lineup. If you have a lineup that projects for 126 and the ownership is at 68, you don't want to have a lineup that projects for only 116, 10 points below your projection, while also having ownership that is at 68 or higher, right? Like that doesn't make any sense. You don't want to eat all of that ownership while also shedding all of that projection. That's going backwards, right? Like if a lineup has a lower projection, lower upside in terms of your projected output, you also need to increase the volatility of that lineup by lowering the ownership. You don't want to reduce the volatility. If you're dropping your projection, that means that you need to accept a whole bunch of volatility, because as your projection goes lower, the more crazy shit you need to happen in order for that lineup to be viable. And the more crazy shit that happens means that ownership sucks, right? Because that's basically what you think about when you think about ownership. So this function is very, very important for things like 3 max and 5 max, because when you build out your portfolio, what you want to do is you want to get a nice chunk of your subset of your portfolio. You want a nice little subset of your portfolio that makes sense based on projections and ownership. So some other things about the trimming functions here. You can technically just use this on its own, right? Like if you don't want to do any macro or micro, you can just say, okay, just apply this to the projections. And you can get a nice little chunk here of lineups that make sense based on projection and ownership, right? You can see that we just did this based off geomean. We have the top overall median, which goes down and down and down linearly. And we also have the geomean that goes down and down and down, right? And we also see that the ownership is going down for the most part, right? I mean, the geomean is a little bit more effective than ownership, but we mostly see that ownership is dropping down too. This lineup is 25 points below the top overall median, right? 25 full points. That's a lot. However, you also shed 40 points in ownership. You also cut your geomean basically in half, right? So even though your median has dropped a lot, you've introduced a lot of volatility into the lineup. So it makes it so that it's a fine lineup to play. Now, you would probably want to play that lineup in larger fields where that volatility can really take hold, but you could do that. So one other note here. We also have some trim slack, and we also have threshold ranges. So the trim slack, when this is going down, right? Let's just go ahead and say, let's trim on weighted ownership. So we have 10 lineups, and what this has done is it has said for, oh wait, did I do that on geomean again? Oh yeah, I did. Okay, fine, whatever. So what it's doing is it has no slack. If this is the top overall geomean and this is the top overall median, it will accept nothing above this geomean. However, if you change the trim slack, what this is going to do is say that I change this to 10%, it will now accept anything at this or 10% higher, right? So every time that it resets, it says, okay, here's what the next geomean that I will accept, but I'm going to add 10% of that geomean on top. So what that does is it allows us to get a couple more lineups while maintaining mostly the same kind of effect of trimming. It's not going to be perfectly linear, but it will follow the same kind of curve down. So if we have this at 10%, now watch what happens. Now we have 502 lineups, right? And if we go and take a look at this, we can still see that for the most part, as we go down these, the geomean is also mostly going down, right? Like we're going down, we're going down, we're going down, we're getting a little bit lower, but it's going to introduce a lot of slack that allows us to get more lineups. Right? So say that you were building a 20 max and say that we wanted to say, I don't know, let's go with, say, all stacks, and let's just go with 0 lineup edge just to start. And this is fully reset. So let's apply that to portfolio. And then let's say that we only want 3-man stacks. Okay, we have 551. Now, if I apply no slack to this, we probably get like 7 lineups or something. 10 lineups, okay? But what if I wanted 20 lineups out of that, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and reset that. Let's go back up here. We're going to remove anything that is negative edge. We're going to give ourselves only 3-man stacks. And then we're going to introduce 1% of trim slack. Let's say 5%. Let's overshoot it a little bit. And then let's apply. Hey, look at that. 20 lineups. And if we go and look at this, we can see what the slack did, right? So we see, yeah, we're allowing at times it goes a little bit above the geo mean as it's dropping in median. But by and large, it does cut down and go downwards, right? We start at 513, we drop down to 5.31 or 3.21. I can't talk. So that trim slack allows you to get more lineups with a very similar kind of trimming function that you need to use when you are considering ownership and projection. So the last thing to show with this is going to be the threshold range. So say that you didn't really care about dropping ownership on lineups below a certain projection range, right? Because after you get past about 10 points below what the max projection range is, at that point, like, you already have so much volatility introduced that, like, say that you don't really care that much about dropping any more ownership. Or say that you have the opposite, right? Say that you only want to trim below a certain threshold of that, right? So let's go ahead and say that I only want to trim lineups that are between 135 fantasy points and 145 fantasy in terms of the projection, right? We can do that. So let's just go ahead and say let's go ahead and do it with this. This is fine. And let's see what that does. So that only trimmed a couple lineups because we only have a couple lineup in that range, right? And then it just said, fuck it, here's the rest. So let's reset the portfolio and instead say that we want to trim, that we want to ignore lineups above 135 fantasy points projection. So now when we do that, it's going to give us 50 lineups. And that's because it said, okay, you can have all of the lineups that are above 135 fantasy points. But then as soon as you get to 135, we're going to start trimming. Because we only want lineups that are below 135 fantasy points that are justified by their ownership variable. So that's a good thing to have in a couple different cases. I do not use the sorting threshold range very often, but that's mostly because when I'm building things out, I'm subsetting my lineups into a larger portfolio. If I was looking to do this for 20 max, I think that would be completely viable, right? You would say, all right, I am fine with the ownership of any lineup that I have that is at the projection max or 5 points below it. But then after that, I want to trim things out. I want to make sure that any lineup that is less than 5 points below my max has appropriate ownership. I think that's a completely justifiable thing to do. And that's why those functions are there. Okay. Quick break really quick. I need to make sure that everything is going on in life around me. I don't usually stream for this long, and I have streamed for this long 2 days in a row. So my voice is going to be shot by the end of today. Let's see what's going on in Discord here. Politics channel. Yep, things are being politicsed. Let's see. MLB looks like it's going well. I have to run in WNBA. I forgot about doing that. Let's go make sure that things are not on fire with the other company that I work for. Nope, things are fine. Okay, cool. Let's get back to it. So let's reset and let's move on to presets. So these presets, I built these. Man, do I even want to talk about presets? I'm going to skip the presets. I think that I'm going to remove them. If anybody wants to ask about the presets separately, then you absolutely can. But I plan on removing them if I don't see anything good from the back testing that I do tomorrow. So I'm going to move on from presets and talk about Stratify, because I use Stratify all the fucking time. I think that it's probably the best function that is in here outside of maybe the exposure management stuff, which is very cool. But the stratification function, so this is a linear stratification based on a stat. And what we can use it for is trying to build out subsets based on that stat. So we have different stat choices here that we can stratify on. Typically, the thing that I use it the most for and that I think it's the most valuable for is diversity. So let's go back up here and go back to what we were talking about with, say, okay, we're happy with this. Let's just go ahead and remove all of the negative edge lineups and just do 3-man stacks. So now we have 551 lineups, but they are all kind of, a lot of them may be very similar. If we open this up, we're going to see, diversity is chunked in and out. But say that I just wanted to get these lineups, this basic set of lineup, a positive edge lineup that is a 3-man stack. Say that I wanted like 100 of those, or if I wanted to aim for 150 of them. If I wanted to make sure that I was getting lineups that were appropriately different, I would use the diversity stratification. So if I do that, this gives me, I aimed for 150 and it gave me 135. I'll talk about that in a second. But what you will see here now is that these lineups have a linear diversity drop all the way down from the highest diversity in the portfolio down to the lowest diversity. And what that will give me is natural diversification and hedging throughout my portfolio, which is vital. It is super important. It's always the largest chunk of the portfolios that I build, typically around 50 to 60% of my portfolio. Well, like 45 to 50% of my portfolio, 45 to 55 or so, 50% or so of my portfolio is based on diversity. And the reason for that is because I want to make sure that I am not getting lineups that look very similar. I want to make sure that my band is nice and wide when I am building out a whole bunch of lineups for a GPP. I want a whole bunch of different shots at a whole bunch of different finishing percentiles and a whole bunch of different lineup combinations and a whole bunch of guys intermixed with different guys, right? That is what I want. And to show that this is working, let's introduce another thing that I have not talked about here yet with player analysis. So if you go below your portfolio and you hit analyze players, what you can do is you can see all of the different players that you have, what their exposure is, what their average diversity, what their average median, average ownership, all that different stuff is, right? So if I look at this, right, and I say, okay, I have 40% Debo, 38% Jaden Daniels, 32% Christian McCaffrey. Like I have a whole bunch of different guys here and it's pretty spread out, right? This is great. If I wanted to try to maintain similar diversification in a portfolio, I would do that using the diversity tool. So if I just hit this on all 5,700 lineups and then I go analyze players, what I'm expecting to see is something similar to the entire base of my lineup, but now condensed down to a chunk that I can actually play. Because I can't play all 6,000 lineups, but I can get a similar diversification of that larger subset cut down into a chunk that I can actually play using stratification with diversity. Now, I could do other things with this as well, right? Diversification is not the only stratification that we can do. We can also stratify on weighted ownership. So now what this is going to do is, let's go ahead and set up the same example here of just positive edge 3-man stacks. Size is 3 mans. Go ahead and portfolio. So if I wanted to do this on weighted ownership, I can do the same thing. Now, let's analyze what this looks like right now really quick, just because, we want to see what we're getting. So right now, in all 551 of these lineups, I have 48% Jaden Daniels, 37% Debo, 37% Igbuka. When I hit weighted ownership, what we're going to see, we get 124. And what we'll see is that we get weighted ownership from the highest weighted ownership in those lineups to the lowest weighted ownership in those lineups. And again, this is going to make it so that you get a nice linear diversification of your lineup based now on weighted ownership. You have lineups that have very little ownership. You have lineups that have a lot of ownership, and you have every kind of lineup in between. You can think of it as ticking off based on an x-axis, every single little point in between the max and the min. So now when we go down here and we look at analyze players after hitting that, what we end up with is, again, we have a nice chunking diversification of the players that we have, but this time we would expect to be based on weighted ownership. We would expect to have players that have high ownership and players that have low ownership, right? All the way across our portfolio. Now, when I do this kind of stuff, I am typically using it to create small chunks of my portfolio. For instance, if I wanted to go up here and say, okay, I want part of my lineup to be 3-man stacks that have a lot of ownership. Actually, I need to introduce one more thing before I talk about that, but I'm going to foreshadow into that. So you can also use the sample range slider here, right? And what this is going to do is say, for whatever stat this is, I only want to grab and sample, or I only want to use the stratification and the linear function on the top X amount, right? Top 50% of those stats, bottom 50% of those stats, bottom 25% of those stats, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So say that we wanted to redo this example, right? Here is some positive edge 3-man stacks, right? But I only want to have the highest ownership subset of them. I only want to have the highest 25% and linear diversification between those. I can do that. So I aim for 150, but remember, we cut down the sample here a lot. So there's not actually 150 of those lineups to grab. So it gave me 72. But now I only have the highest ownership lineups here, right? What do I always say? Ownership is a really important thing to consider, especially for small fields. So if I was building out a small field set, I could do something like this. I'm only considering the higher ownership portions of these lineups, right? The other thing that I think that this is really important for is creating subsets. So getting back to the point that I was going to make before I introduced the sample range thing. Say that I wanted a portion of my 150 lineups to be just the highest owned 3-man stacks, right? So let's go ahead and reset the portfolio and say, all right, I don't actually care about the macro filter, but what I do care about is the micro filter. I'm going to do only 3-man stacks. We're going to hit the portfolio here. And then I want to say, I want about 25% of my 100 lineups to be high owned, so high weighted ownership, 3-man stacks. Hit my portfolio, gave me 21% of my portfolio. Now I can use for high owned 3-man stacks. All of these are going to have relatively high ownership. There's not going to be any that are outside of the top 25th percentile in terms of ownership. And I can just add these to my custom export. So let's introduce that now. So after I have done that part, then I can say add all to custom export. Now, when I reset the portfolio, I am now going to go over to my export base where we can see the lineups that we have added to our custom export. So this is those 21 lineups that I just created for my portfolio that are high owned 3-man stacks, right? And we can stack these, right? So now let's say that I wanted to go back and create another portion of my portfolio that is just the lowest owned 3-man stacks, right? So let's go ahead and apply 3-man stacks to the whole thing. Go down here, and instead of doing the top 25th percentile, let's do the bottom 25th percentile, right? And apply that. So that gives me 25 lineups. Add all to custom export, go back up, reset portfolio, hit the export base. So now I see that I have 46 lineups that I have stacked together, and I'm now creating my portfolio through subsetting. This is my preferred way to use the portfolio manager. I like to say, okay, I have a portion of my portfolio dedicated to X, a portion of my portfolio dedicated to Y. I'm going to stack these things together using subsetting and functions. And then at the end, I'm going to look at the lineups that I have created. And then finally go over through the exposure management. Now, I will show the conditionals manager here in a second, but I think that this is an important point to show the exposure management because this is kind of like a natural next step when creating the custom export. So here we can take any players that we have and we can adjust their exposure here using these tools. Now, in these 46 lineups, let's take a look at the players that we have, right? I have 47% Debo. That kind of seems like a lot of Debo. He's going to be highly owned. His price is relatively low, but it's kind of a lot of Debo. What if I wanted less, right? I've already built out my lineups. I don't want to go through and reset everything. I'm happy with the lineups that I built, but I just think that I have too much Debo. So what you can do is you can go to the exposure management. And what we'll do is we'll say, all right, here's Debo. Instead of having 47%, I just want to drop him down to 35%, right? But I like Debo in my Washington stacks. So like, I kind of want to ignore those. Okay, no problem. Let's ignore Washington stacks and try to get him down to 35%. Note that this says target exposure. And I'll show you why here in a sec, because I don't think we're going to be able to get him down to 35% ignoring Washington stacks. Maybe we will. But we got a lot of Washington stacks here. So let's see if we can get him down to 35% while also ignoring Washington stacks. Oops. So now what we're going to want to do, and I just hit it on portfolio, which was a mistake. It's going to run through the portfolio and do that. And it's going to be this whole thing. It's going to take a couple seconds. But this also introduces another thing, which is the difference between portfolio buttons and export buttons. So when you click it on the portfolio, it is going to affect the entire portfolio, right? We were looking at the export base. So we wanted to hit the export button. So now it's going to take a second. It's going through all of those lineups, all 6,000 lineups, whatever. Oh, no, it killed me. All right, that's no problem. So let's go ahead and reload this and go back through our process here. Also, this has not happened very much up until recently. If this happens to you, please reach out to me. I have only gotten it to happen when I have had really long uses of the portfolio manager. We're talking like 30 minutes long. I think that it goes through a reset process after like 30 minutes. So if you're using the portfolio manager for a long time, maybe this happens. I'm not sure. I have only gotten it to happen when I'm doing things like this, where I'm taking a long time in between functions and then it resets. So let's go and rebuild what we had just gone through, right? So we know that we're going to do, we don't care about the macro. Let's go back into the micro. Let's do 3-man stacks, portfolio. And then let's stratify, weighted ownership. We wanted the top 25%, and we're going to aim for 25. Add those, reset, back up here, 3-man stacks, portfolio, back down here. Oops. Cut this down, hit portfolio, add to export, reset. Okay, cool. So we knew that we had 47% Debo. Let's try to get that down to 35% while ignoring Washington stacks, because we want to keep him in our Washington stacks. We don't want to touch the exposure in the Washington stacks, but we want to reduce his exposure as a one-off. So when we hit the export button there, what it's going to do is it's going to go through our export lineups, and it's going to try to drop down Debo Samuel based on applicable replacements, meaning players who project within range of him and are within range of him in terms of his price, and replace him with those. So now when we go to analyze, let's see what we got. Okay, cool. We got him down to 35% without adjusting any of his exposure in our Washington stacks. So what if we also wanted to say, oh man, I really just want more Terry McLaurin, right? Like we only have 26%. I kind of want to match my exposure there to Debo Samuel. So now we don't mind if we add him into Washington stacks, right? Let's go ahead and add him in, and let's aim for a target exposure of 35% with Terry McLaurin. So again, now what it's going to try to do is it's going to look for players that Terry McLaurin is similar to, players that have a similar salary range and are at a applicable position to add him into. So let's go ahead and analyze players, see what we got. Awesome. So we were able to get 35% Terry McLaurin. We were able to drop down our Deebo Samuel exposure to 35%. So now when we go through our lineups, we're going to be able to see that we have, he did get added here. Now we have an Austin Eckler, Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel, and is that all? And then Washington Commanders. I think that I need to remove defense from the stack consideration here because that is not right. This one has, oh, that's Arizona. So we now have a 4-man Arizona. That's hilarious. Okay. Anyway, so that's how you add or subtract exposure for your players. What if we said, okay, let's go back over to the range of outcomes here really quick. So I have in here, let's say only 11% Chase Brown. Say I want more Chase Brown. Okay. Who do I have a lot of? I have a lot of Devon Achane, right? So I actually, this is a newer feature. I'm not sure if this is going to work, but let's see if we can get some more Chase Brown. I only had, how much of him? Did I have 5% or 10%? Okay, so I have 10%. Let's add some Chase Brown at the expense of Amon-Ra St. Brown. All right, let's try to get 20% Chase Brown at the expense of Achane. And do that. So we had 10% Chase Brown. We're trying to get him up to 20%. And we just want to remove Devon Achane. Let's see if that worked. Cool. Okay, so we got Chase Brown up to 21%. And Achane should be down here somewhere. Did I miss him? Or did he just not get replaced? Hold on. Yeah, so he moved down to 6%. So that's awesome. That's what we were aiming for, right? We removed some Achane and we replaced him with Chase Brown. So this exposure management tool also can be used for late swap, right? And that's why we have this remove locked teams or the ignore specific stacks. Say that this is after lock and say that it's for NBA, right? And you have, Anthony Davis gets ruled out and now it's going to be whatever his backup center is, right? Say that you wanted to add in a whole bunch of that backup center and you wanted to target a certain amount for that player, you could do that now with this exposure management tool. You would just go grab your portfolio or grab your lineups out of DraftKings, load them into the portfolio manager tool, make your swaps, ignore whatever teams have already been locked for the slate, and then go ahead and try to import now up the exposure of that player into your lineups. Or if you said, Jimmy Butler gets ruled out, but you don't want to replace him with anybody, random. You want to replace him with other high-priced guys. Or Giannis gets ruled out. You want to replace him with Anthony Davis. You could do that, right? You could say, okay, let's go through that here, right? Austin Eckler. How much does Austin Eckler cost? Let's go here and let's go ahead and just say boop, 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 boop. We only want to look at running backs. Eckler's probably, nope, he's not even that good of a play. Okay, he's 4,800, right? Say that Austin Eckler was ruled out and you just wanted to replace him with Tank Bigsby and Dylan Sampson, right? Whatever. I don't know. Just players that are similarly priced. You would say, all right, Austin Eckler got ruled out. I want 0% of him. And if you just wanted to do that, right? If we just wanted to say, like, I don't want any Austin Eckler, You could also just do that. You could just say, I don't want any more Austin Eckler. So I had 28% of him here. Let's go ahead and analyze the players. So now you can see that we don't have any Austin Eckler. What we ended up with instead was probably more Merritt, probably some more, you know, whoever. I don't even know who it got replaced with. Probably got replaced some in the flex, some at running back, right? Like, but now we have no Austin Eckler, right? So we were able to remove him from our lineups. So you can use this as a late swap tool as well. Okay, cool. So all of that has been done. Now, the last thing that I'm going to show as we're on here is the conditionals. So conditionals is your basic if-then, right? I want to keep lineups that are containing X player where they also contain none of players Y or Z, right? Or I want to remove lineups containing X player where they also contain any of players Y or Z, right? So let's go ahead and look at these and say, all right, I want to keep lineups containing Terry McLaurin where they also contain none of, let's just, for the sake of this, Deebo Samuel, right? Let's do that for the export. So I have 38 lineups remaining where the lineups that contain Terry McLaurin do not contain Deebo Samuel, right? This is the basic conditionals manager, and you can play around with this. This is a relatively new one. If you experience any kinks, please let me know. The logic here is kind of silly. So after we have done all of our things, and after we are happy with, you know, the lineups that we have built, right? Finally, let's go ahead and say, okay, I like these lineups. This is what I want to use for my subset of my 20 max. I'm going to go ahead and use diversity. I'm going to aim for 20 lineups here for my entirety. I'm going to apply it to my export. Here's 18. I'll find 2 other lineups. I'll hand build them or whatever, right? Now what you do is you can download your portfolio. And when you hit download portfolio, what you're going to end up with is an importable set of lineups. It's missing DST. I knew about that yesterday, but I didn't have time to fix it today. Luckily, the season doesn't start for a couple days. But what this will allow you to do is then take these lineups and insert them into a lineup file for DraftKings to upload, right? All that you do is you just remove these things. Well, I mean, you don't even need to remove these things, really. What you need to do is you need to go to DraftKings. You need to go to your lineups. You need to edit your entries, download. I mean, this is for Showdown or whatever, and then you would just insert them here, right? Save it and then upload it. But that's the full process, right? So that is all of the things that the portfolio manager do. There are like endless ways to use this thing in terms of process, in terms of the different combinations of functions, in terms of all the different things that you can do with this. But from a basic perspective, this is a full MME tool. And this honestly just makes Paydirt a one-stop shop. Before this tool was created, I'll talk a little bit with my face here. Before this tool was created, Paydirt was mostly single entry 3 max, 20 max, right? It was mostly for smaller subsets because when you were building things out, the tools were great for giving you subsets, but not for an entire portfolio. The portfolio manager gives you a full-fledged tool to build out your portfolio. And I have been using it for the last month and have experienced an incredible jump in my MME play. It has turned me into somebody who literally was like bad at MME to somebody who I am good. Like my 1% range is in the 1.5 range now, whereas it was at like 0.8% or something in terms of my MME play. So it has literally doubled my MME perspective. There are multiple players in the Discord that have used it to great success. It has turned a couple Paydirt players into monsters already. It's going to crush Showdown for the reason that the dupe predictions are better than anywhere else in the industry, and dupes have such a massive outsized variable on how good a lineup is for Showdown. It's just a really, really good tool. So I implore everyone to get used to using it. And I implore you that if you have not used it yet, to give it a try. You can use it in combo with any of your favorite optimizers. You can use it in combo with SaberSim. You can use it just by itself, right? There are a lot of different applications. There's a lot of really good, strong use cases for this tool. If you wanted to use it for single entry, 3 max, stuff like that, you can do that too. Let's go do an example of that really quick, because I think that also is something you can do here. So let's go ahead and say reset portfolio, and let's clear our custom export. So if I was doing this and saying, all right, how do I build a single entry lineup? So one of the things that you can do here is you can say, all right, what are a whole bunch of lineups that I like? And then you can use the player analysis and the different team analysis stuff. Oh man, I didn't even show off the combo analysis here. So I'll show that off while I'm talking through this. Let's go ahead and start with, again, let's just do the thing that we have been doing here. Let's go ahead and do positive lineup, 3-man stacks. Say that this was just like what you already wanted to do, right? Or say that you want to take another step further, right? And say, just show me, you know, top 100 of the weighted owner lineups, right? Here's 56 lineups that are highly weighted ownership based on stratification that are 3-man stacks. So let's go analyze the players and say, okay, if I was going to build a lineup, I would want to start with Jaden Daniels, Deebo Samuel, James Conner, and Terry McLaurin, right? Like this is a good core because these players show up in these lineups, right? And if you wanted to say, well, what do I think is probably the lineup that is most representative, you can use the diversity score for that, right? So if what we know about the way that these lineups are built out is using diversity is something that can help you make better decisions about single entry or 3 max. If what we're aiming for is a lineup that is most similar to the lineups that I have entered into the portfolio manager, then we can use diversity to say, okay, if I want something that is representative of the lineups that I think are useful for single entry, then I can do that. So let's go ahead and just download this. Because these are the lineups, right, that just automatically I think are good because we just, you know, we said we want 3 high-owned 3-man stacks. Let's go ahead and download this. I'm going to delete this stuff because I don't need it. I'm going to save it, and then I'm going to re-upload this. And the reason why I'm going to re-upload it, I'm going to hit clear data here, is because I want to reset the diversity score. I want it to be just based on the lineups that I just saw. So let's go ahead and reload this. It's not based on names. Here. And this is just those 56 lineups. Oops. What happened there? Did I fuck this up? Oh, right. The fucking defense. God damn it, motherfucker. Okay. Hold on. I'll show you this with MLB really quick. Because I have MLB lineups and I know that I can use for this. So let's go into MLB. Just use from Slate a couple days ago. All right, so let that build up really quick. And then I'm going to create a subset, and I'm going to show you how to use that subset to do 3-entry max or single entry. All right, so let's just go ahead and say, for the purposes of doing kind of the exact same thing that I was just doing, we're going to do positive edge 5-man stacks. Right? And then we're going to stratify. We're going to do weighted ownership, and we're going to say 100 lineups, top 75%. Right? Cool. So that gave me 55. I'm going to download. And then we're going to delete these. And then I'm going to save, and that is 103. Okay, cool, grand, dandy, awesome. So we're going to go back to data load. We're going to clear data. And then we're going to reload those. So I have salaries. I have to go here for my downloads and do those, and then go back here and do the projections that I had. Okay, cool. So here's those 55 lineups. Now, the reason why I reloaded it, the reason why I exported it and then reloaded it is because now this resets the diversity score. Because the diversity score is always going to be 0 to 1 based on the entire portfolio that is loaded into the tool. So if I want a representation of the lineups that I think are good for single entry, what I can do is reload this and say, all right, what is the lineup that has the lowest diversity score? Because this is going to be the lineup that is most representative of all the lineups that I have in this portfolio, right? So when I go and I say analyze players, I had a bunch of Shohei, a bunch of Kirby, a bunch of Duran. I did not have a great slate, by the way, on the 29th. And then Cade Horton, Alvarez, Pena, right? So this lineup has Horton, Kirby, Ohtani, Duran, Pena, Alvarez, Wyatt Langford, right? Like this lineup is the most representative of the 3 max, 5 max settings that I had done off of the entire portfolio. So I could just use this as my single entry lineup and I'd be totally happy with that, right? Because this has everything that I want, right? If I wanted 3 max, what I would do is I could either go with the trim and do weighted ownership and just trim my portfolio down. So here's 7, right? And I could choose any of these 3 lineups. Doesn't matter. Or I could use the stratification on diversity and say, just give me the 3 lineups that represent my portfolio here the best. And this is what I would use for my 3 max, right? This gives me a Texas stack. It gives me a Dodger stack, and it gives me a New York Mets stack. Man, this actually would have been a pretty good 3-man set. With Skeens, Horton, Cade Horton, Kirby for 2 of these, and then I have a Skeens, Horton, right? So this would be my 3 max portfolio. That is how I use the tool for building subsets for 3 max and 5 max off of my portfolio. What I usually do is I build my entire portfolio first, my MME, I export that, I save it, and then I reload it into the tool and say, okay, now I'm going to build my 3 max and my 5 max and my single entry stuff. And I use this kind of process. I want to look for low diversity for my single entry. I want to look for a nice spread of my full portfolio for my 3 max and my 5 max. And for like 20 max, I'd probably go through like a mini kind of the same thing that I went through for my full portfolio. But I would mostly use diversity, exposure management, and trimming functions so that I could build out a smaller subset of my portfolio. Now, the last thing that I want to show really quick is the combos. And the combos are a really cool thing that I think can give you a lot of insight about your lineup. So let's go back to NFL here. And we'll go to here and here and here, right? So we're going to let this load up. Now, the combos is showing you the ownership and value of the highest or of every combo that you have based on 2-man or 3-man combos. So I'll show you what that means. If I were to look at my entire portfolio here and say, what players do I have the highest combos of? I can see, obviously, my lineups. I can see what player stats I have. I can see what stack sets I have too, right? Like if I wanted to analyze the stacks of my entire portfolio, I can do that. And it's going to tell you the same things that it tells you about players, just at the stack level. It's going to tell you things like what the average salary, what the average median, what the average finish percentage, what the average edge is of all the different stacks, right? So I have 33% Washington in this run. The average median is 123. The average lineup edge is positive. I also have a shit ton of Green Bay, but like those are kind of bad stacks, right? The average lineup edge of those is negative 8.96%. San Francisco, the average lineup edge is plus 10%. Those look really good, but they only make up 5% of my portfolio, right? So if I wanted to see what the most combos I have of 2-man or 3-man combos, I can do that here. So let's go ahead and see let's analyze my 2-man combos. So the combo that I have the most of in this portfolio is Debo plus Jane Daniels. I have it in 22% of my lineups. The average finish percentage is 1.7%. Average lineup edge is 0.39. So it's about neutral. Christian McCaffrey plus Debo is a negative lineup edge. I have it in 12% of my total, right? So this can inform you of combos that you may want to avoid. Let's say that I sorted this by average lineup edge. I have 5% of my total lineups are Jordan Love and Jaden Reed. The average lineup edge of those combos is negative 14%. That kind of sucks. Jordan Love plus Romeo Dobbs, negative 11%. That kind of sucks. But also what you're seeing here mostly is like, man, I don't like Green Bay stacks. So that doesn't tell me that much. But let's instead say, okay, let's exclude my running backs and my defense. And let's look at those 3-man combos, right? So this is basically saying, what are my stacks? What are the things that I have the most of? The stack that I have the most of for 3-mans are Debo, Egbuka, and Jaden Daniels. And that is a strong positive line of edge. The one that I have the second most of is Baker Mayfield plus Samuel plus Evans, and those are negative edge, right? So maybe I want to avoid Debo in my Baker Mayfield plus Mike Evans stacks, right? You can already imagine how strong this is going to be for Showdown. Being able to say, okay, I have this large of my subset of lineups are this combo of these two players. This combo of my two players has this significant negative lineup edge. I want to avoid those two combos and then go rebuild, right? I want to go into the conditionals manager and say, I don't want any combo of this, right? And we can do that, right? So let's go ahead and do that really quick. Let's say in my conditionals manager, okay, I want to remove lineups containing Debo Samuels, where they also contain all of Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans. Oops. And Mike Evans. Let's go ahead and do that. Sick. Okay. So now let's go ahead and go look at our combos. Let's do the same thing, right? Analyze combos. So now we see that those have been completely removed, right? Like we knew that those were negative edge, so why would we keep them? Very, very powerful thing to be able to see what the combos that you have of players are, assess their lineup edge, assess their dupes, right? Like in Showdown for this Dallas-Philadelphia Showdown that's coming up. Say that I were to have one of my highest be a combo of Jalen Hurts with Dak Prescott and I don't know, fucking Javonte Williams, right? And that one has like a negative lineup edge average of negative 13%. I can just go right in and say, okay, I only want lineups that have, or remove all the lineups that have Jaden Daniels and also have Dak Prescott and Javonte Williams, or remove all my lineups that have Javonte Williams and Jalen Hurts and Dak Prescott. And then boom, there you go. You've already cleaned up your portfolio quite a bit. So super, super cool function here. Can't believe that I almost forgot it. But yeah, that is the portfolio manager. I'm going to cut this now because I've been going for an hour and a half and my voice is starting to give out because I'm not a content guy. But you know what I have to do now? I got to show the subscriptions page because you guys should subscribe. I mean, the tools here are terrific. This is industry gold standard stuff for a cheaper price than you'll get anywhere else in the industry. You get every single sport, every single esport, all the niche sports. You get the portfolio manager, you get the contest analyzer, you get all of these different models, you get all of these different research sheets, you get the newsletter, you get the Discord, you get all this stuff, $40 a month, right? You get the bet sheet, which gets included in the subscription because I'm not a hack and I'm not going to make my betting stuff be separate from my DFS stuff. You get all of that for $40 a month. You also can get an all-access NFL pass for $225, and that lasts until February 28th. If you just want to try things out, you can get a day pass for $5. I don't think anywhere else in the industry offers a day pass because they're hacks. Weekly pass for $20. So go grab a subscription. Try out Paydirt. I promise you, you won't be disappointed. Once you get used to the tools at Paydirt, it's hard to go back. So thanks for hanging out with me for the last hour and a half. And listening to me talk about this tool that I'm really excited about. If you have any questions, reach out in the Discord. You can find the link to the Discord in the information drop down on the site. You can reach out to me on Twitter as well. But yeah, it's been great. I hope that we have a terrific NFL season. I'm really excited about it. And yeah, thanks for all the support. You guys are the reason why I'm able to just do this for my job and support my cat over here, who just likes to sleep behind me. So thanks so much. I appreciate it. I'm going to go drink some tea and play some video games. So adios. Peace. Bye.